I was just seconds away from signing my will when my housekeeper whispered, "Don't drink it. Switch the glasses." I listened, and moments later, my wife collapsed, exposing a deadly conspiracy that changed my life forever. Subscribe now for more unforgettable true stories.
I never imagined that the most important signature of my life would become the moment that saved it. That morning, I woke up believing I had finally found peace. At 68 years old, I had spent 4 decades building my business from nothing. Every long night, every missed vacation, every sacrifice had led to this day. My lawyer was coming over with the final documents for my will. Once I signed them, nearly everything I owned would legally pass to my wife if anything ever happened to me. She had been by my side for 12 years. At least, that's what I believed. As I stood in my study, looking out the window, I watched the sunrise paint the garden in shades of gold. I smiled to myself, thinking about how lucky I was. I had survived financial crashes, health scares, and countless betrayals in business. But love had finally found me later in life. Or so I thought. Around 10 o'clock, my wife walked into the room, wearing a soft white dress. She smiled warmly, kissed me on the cheek, and gently squeezed my hand. "Today's a big day," she whispered. "It is," I replied, with a smile. She looked almost emotional. "You've worked so hard for everything. I'm proud of you." Those words touched my heart more than she probably realized. A few minutes later, my attorney arrived carrying a leather briefcase filled with documents. We exchanged greetings before settling into the dining room. Everything was organized perfectly. The witnesses were already there, and all that remained was my signature. While my attorney explained a few final legal details, my wife excused herself to bring everyone something to drink. She returned, carrying a silver tray with several glasses of water. She placed one directly in front of me. "There you go, darling," she said sweetly. I thanked her without thinking twice. Everything looked completely normal, until something happened that changed my life forever. Our longtime housekeeper, Maria, entered the room carrying a folder she claimed she'd forgotten to give me earlier. As she walked behind my chair, she suddenly stumbled. Her shoulder lightly bumped into mine. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattered across the floor, and everyone instinctively looked down. As I leaned forward to help gather the papers, Maria quickly whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't drink it. Switch the glasses." My entire body froze. For a split second, I thought I had imagined it. When I looked into Maria's eyes, I didn't see panic. I saw certainty. She didn't repeat herself. She simply continued collecting the papers as if nothing unusual had happened. My heartbeat became deafening. Questions exploded inside my head. Why would she say that? Was she mistaken? Was someone playing a cruel joke? Or was she trying to save my life? Across the table, my wife smiled at me exactly as she always did. Calm, patient, loving. If Maria hadn't whispered those words, I would have picked up the glass immediately. Instead, I forced myself to remain calm. I pretended to adjust the paperwork in front of me. While everyone focused on the attorney explaining another clause in the will, I slowly reached forward. Without making the slightest sound, I switched my glass with the one sitting closest to my wife. It took less than 2 seconds. At least, I hope no one had noticed. I leaned back in my chair and tried to steady my breathing. My palms were soaked with sweat. Every second felt like an hour. The attorney finally finished speaking. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Harrison." I picked up the expensive fountain pen lying beside the documents. Just before signing, my wife reached for the glass. She smiled at me. "Cheers to our future," she said softly, before taking a long sip. Time seemed to stop. I stared at her without blinking. She placed the glass back on the table. 1 minute passed. Nothing happened. I almost convinced myself Maria had been wrong. Then my wife's fingers suddenly loosened around the pen she had been holding. It slipped onto the polished wooden table with a sharp click. She blinked a few times. Confusion spread across her face. "Are you all right?" one of the witnesses asked. She tried to answer, but the words came out slurred. The room instantly fell silent. She grabbed the edge of the table as though trying to steady herself. Then her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor. Everyone jumped from their seats. Someone shouted for an ambulance. The attorney rushed towards her. Another witness checked her pulse. I remained frozen in my chair. Not because I lacked compassion, but because one terrifying realization echoed through my mind. That glass was originally meant for me. I slowly turned my head towards Maria. She was standing near the doorway. Our eyes met for only a second. She gave the smallest, almost invisible nod. Not with relief, not with satisfaction, but with fear. The kind of fear carried by someone who knew this nightmare had only just begun. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the front door and surrounded my wife. They worked quickly, asking urgent questions while preparing to transport her to the hospital. One of them looked up at me. "Did she take any medication today?" I hesitated. I don't know. That answer was true, because in that moment I realized something horrifying. For 12 years, I had shared a home with someone whose life I suddenly knew almost nothing about. And if Maria's right, then someone hadn't simply tried to poison a glass of water. Someone had planned my death, right before I signed everything I owned. As the ambulance disappeared down the street, my attorney quietly closed the will and looked at me. "I think," he said carefully, "we should postpone today's signing." I nodded without taking my eyes off the road outside, because deep inside, one question refused to leave my mind. How long had my wife been planning this? And perhaps even more frightening, who else already knew? The ambulance disappeared beyond the gates, leaving behind an eerie silence that settled over the house like a storm waiting to burst. The witnesses had already left. My attorney quietly packed the unsigned will back into his briefcase, and police officers began asking routine questions. I answered each one carefully, but my mind was somewhere else. It was fixed on Maria's warning. Those 5 whispered words had changed everything. An officer approached me. "Sir, we'll need the glass your wife drank from." I nodded and pointed toward the dining table. A forensic technician carefully sealed the glass inside an evidence bag without allowing anyone else to touch it. "Did anyone else drink from these glasses?" the officer asked. "No," I answered. "Only my wife." He scribbled something in his notebook before walking away. Maria quietly stood near the kitchen doorway, avoiding anyone's attention. She looked nervous, almost frightened, as though she expected someone to silence her at any moment. Once the officers were distracted, I slowly walked toward her. "Maria?" I whispered. She refused to look at me. "Not here," her voice trembled. "Please, not now." Before I could ask another question, another officer called my name. I had no choice but to step away. Nearly an hour later, everyone finally left except me and Maria. The house felt completely different. Only that morning it had been filled with laughter and anticipation. Now every room felt cold. Every photograph on the walls suddenly seemed fake. I sat alone in my study, staring at the unsigned will lying on my desk. If I had signed those papers, if I had taken that glass, everything I owned would already belong to my wife, and I wouldn't even be alive to question it. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Maria stood at the doorway. "Can we talk now?" she asked. I nodded. She carefully closed the study door behind her before speaking. "I've worked for your family for 18 years. I know. I watched your first wife battle cancer." I lowered my eyes. "I watched your children grow up." She paused. "And I've never lied to you." I looked directly at her. "Then tell me everything." Maria took a deep breath. "It started about 3 months ago." "What started?" "I noticed your wife meeting a man every time you traveled." My heartbeat quickened. "What man?" "I don't know his name." "Did you recognize him?" She shook her head. "He always arrived in a black SUV, expensive clothes, dark sunglasses. They never came inside the house together. They always met near the back garden." I felt my stomach tighten. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried." She looked down at the floor. "But every time I wanted to tell you, she somehow already knew." "What do you mean?" Maria's voice became even quieter. "Someone inside this house was telling her everything." The words sent a chill through my body. Someone else? There were only a handful of people who had access to the property: the gardener, the driver, Maria, and my wife herself. Unless someone outside had been watching. Maria reached into the pocket of her apron. "I've kept something." She handed me a small folded piece of paper. It was old and slightly wrinkled.
When I unfolded it, I immediately recognized the handwriting. It belonged to my wife. The note contained only one sentence. "Tomorrow, after he signs everything, we won't have to wait much longer." No name, no signature, nothing else. I stared at those words for several seconds. What is this? I found it in the laundry room. When? About 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you show me then? I wasn't sure what it meant. She swallowed nervously. But today, when I saw her carrying your glass herself, Maria's eyes filled with tears, I remembered the note. I slowly folded the paper again. This wasn't proof of murder, but it was enough to convince me that something terrible had been planned. Just then, my phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown number. I answered. "Hello?" A calm male voice replied, "If you want the truth, don't trust anyone." "Who are you?" "I know what happened today." My heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean?" "I know why your wife collapsed." "Who are you?" There was a brief silence. Then he spoke again. "Check your security cameras before the police do." The line went dead. I immediately rushed toward the security room. The cameras recorded every entrance, hallway, and the entire dining room. My hands trembled as I rewound the footage to earlier that morning. Everything appeared ordinary. The lawyer arrived, the witnesses entered, my wife walked into the kitchen. Then something caught my attention. One camera overlooked the hallway outside the kitchen. A man wearing a delivery uniform entered through the back entrance for less than 30 seconds. He wasn't carrying a package. Instead, he handed something very small to my wife. She quickly slipped it into her pocket before looking around. The man immediately walked away. I paused the video, zoomed in. The image became blurry, but one detail remained visible. A silver ring on the man's right hand with a black stone in the center. I had seen that ring before, somewhere, but I couldn't remember where. Maria stepped closer to the screen. "I've seen him." "You have?" She nodded immediately. "He came here last month pretending to repair the internet." "He was here before?" "Yes." "And your wife let him inside while you were at the office?" I replayed the video again and again. Each time, my suspicion grew stronger. This wasn't an accident. This had been carefully planned. Just as I reached for my phone to call the detective, another notification appeared. Someone had remotely attempted to erase the security footage. The screen flashed. "Unauthorized access detected." I stared in disbelief. Whoever was behind this wasn't waiting. They already knew the cameras had recorded something, and now they were trying to destroy the evidence before anyone else could see it. Without wasting another second, I disconnected the recording system from the internet and copied every video file onto an external drive. As I held that drive tightly in my hand, I realized something chilling. The person trying to erase the footage wasn't just desperate. They were watching, and they knew I was getting closer to the truth.
I slipped the external drive into the inside pocket of my jacket and locked the security room behind me. Whoever had tried to erase those recordings had failed, for now. But one thing was painfully clear. I was no longer dealing with suspicion alone. Someone was actively trying to destroy evidence, and they were moving faster than I expected. Maria looked at me anxiously. "What are we going to do?" I answered without hesitation. "We're going to the hospital." "Why?" "Because if my wife survives, she'll know her plan failed." Maria lowered her voice. "And if she realizes you know the truth." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The drive to the hospital felt longer than ever. Every passing car seemed suspicious. I checked my rearview mirror again and again, convinced someone was following me. Maybe it was just fear. Maybe it wasn't. When we arrived, the emergency department was crowded with nurses, doctors, and anxious families. I walked directly to the reception desk. "My wife was brought here about an hour ago." The receptionist checked her computer. "She's in intensive care. The doctors are still evaluating her condition." "Can I see her?" "I'm sorry, not yet." Before I could ask another question, a man in a gray suit approached me. "Mr. Harrison." "Yes." "I'm Detective Collins." He showed me his badge. "We need to ask you a few questions."
I followed him into a quiet consultation room. He placed a thin folder on the table. The laboratory completed a preliminary analysis of the water. My heart pounded. What did they find? There were traces of a fast-acting sedative. A sedative? He nodded. In a high enough dose, it could cause unconsciousness, respiratory failure, or worse, especially in someone your age. So someone poisoned the glass. We're not ready to use that word officially, but yes, the substance shouldn't have been there. I slowly leaned back in my chair. So it wasn't an accident. The detective remained silent for a moment. Tell me honestly, did you switch the glasses? For several seconds I considered lying. Then I remembered Maria's warning. Yes. His eyebrows lifted. Why? I explained everything. Maria's whisper, the glass, the switch, my wife's collapse. The detective listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, he closed the folder. If what you're saying is true, he paused, then someone expected you to drink that water. Before I could respond, another officer hurried into the room. Detective, what is it? The patient's phone has disappeared. My wife's phone? The officer nodded. It was logged into evidence when she arrived, and now it's missing. Detective Collins immediately stood. Who had access? We're checking the surveillance footage now. The detective looked at me. Stay here. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, he returned, looking far more serious than before. The hospital cameras captured someone wearing a doctor's coat entering your wife's room. Was it a doctor? No. They were wearing a fake identification badge. My pulse quickened. Did they take the phone? We believe so. Did anyone stop them? They disappeared before security realized what had happened. I stared at him in disbelief. So someone broke into a hospital to steal her phone. He nodded, which means whatever was on that phone was important. I immediately thought about the mysterious man from the security footage. Could he have been the one wearing the disguise, or was someone else involved? Just then, my own phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. You're looking in the wrong direction. No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. Detective Collins noticed my expression. What happened? I showed him the message. He immediately photographed the screen. We'll trace it. I gave a quiet laugh. You really think they'll leave a trail? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked another question. Tell me about your finances. My finances? Did anyone know you were changing your will today? Only my attorney. Anyone else? I thought carefully. My financial advisor. My wife. And I suddenly stopped speaking. And who? My son. The detective looked up. You have a son? Yes. We don't speak very often. When did he learn about the will? About a week ago. And how did he react? I remembered the conversation clearly. He had seemed unusually interested. Not emotional, not grateful, interested. He had asked detailed questions about insurance policies, trusts, beneficiaries, things he had never cared about before. At the time, I assumed he was simply becoming responsible. Now, I wasn't so sure. The detective wrote his name into the notebook. We'll speak with him. Just then, Maria quietly entered the consultation room. She looked pale. Sir, what is it? I think someone followed me. The detective immediately stood. Describe them. A tall man, dark jacket. He disappeared when I entered the hospital. Collins signaled 2 officers to check outside. As they hurried away, another nurse entered the room. Mr. Harrison? Yes? Your wife regained consciousness for a few seconds. What did she say? The nurse hesitated. She only spoke 3 words. What words? The nurse swallowed. He betrayed me. The room fell silent. Detective Collins frowned. Did she say who? The nurse hedged. She lost consciousness again before we could ask. I felt more confused than ever. If my wife had planned everything, who exactly had betrayed her? The mysterious man? The person who supplied the poison? Or even higher in whatever conspiracy she had become a part of? An hour later, I finally left the hospital. The night air felt heavy. Maria climbed into my car without saying a word. As I started the engine, my headlights illuminated a black SUV parked across the street, the same model Maria had described weeks earlier. Its engine was already running. The windows were completely tinted. For several seconds, neither vehicle moved. Then, slowly, the SUV pulled away, not fast, not nervously, almost as if the driver wanted me to follow. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Every instinct told me it was a trap, but another part of me knew that might be the first real chance to uncover the truth. I glanced at Maria. She looked terrified. "Please don't follow them." I kept my eyes fixed on the disappearing taillights, because deep inside, I knew that whoever was inside that black SUV had answers someone was willing to kill to keep hidden.
I ignored every warning inside my head and slowly pulled my car onto the road behind the black SUV. I stayed several hundred feet back, careful not to attract attention. The streets grew quieter as we left the city lights behind. Maria sat beside me without speaking, her hands tightly clasped together. After nearly 20 minutes, the SUV turned on a narrow road leading toward an abandoned industrial district. Rusted warehouses stood like forgotten monuments, surrounded by broken fences and empty parking lots. The SUV finally stopped outside an old warehouse. Its headlights went dark. I parked a safe distance away and switched off my engine. Maria grabbed my arm. "Please, don't go alone." "I have to. If this is a trap, it probably is. But if I turn back now, I'll never know who wanted me dead." I stepped out of the car and quietly approached the building. One of the warehouse windows had been shattered years ago. Through the opening, I could hear voices. I moved closer. Inside stood 3 people: the man from the security footage, another man in a dark business suit, and my son. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked nervous, pacing back and forth while arguing with the other 2 men. "I told you the plan was simple. My father was supposed to sign first." The man with the silver ring slammed his fist onto a table. Instead, everything fell apart. My son's face turned pale. "I never agreed to kill him. You accepted the money. I thought you only wanted control of the company." The room fell silent. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. The man in the suit spoke calmly. Once the will was signed, his death would have looked completely natural. You were going to inherit your share. You should be thanking us." My son shook his head. "No, this isn't what I agreed to. I want out." The man with the silver ring smiled coldly. "No one walks away." At that moment, my phone accidentally vibrated inside my pocket. The sound was barely noticeable, but inside the warehouse, every head turned toward the broken window. "Someone's outside," the man shouted. I ran. Behind me, I heard footsteps and angry voices. Maria had already started the car before I reached it. "Get in." The tires screamed as we sped away. A black SUV immediately pulled onto the road behind us. The chase lasted several terrifying minutes. Every turn I made, they followed. Then, suddenly, police lights flashed ahead. Detective Collins and several patrol cars had set up a roadblock. The SUV tried to turn around. It was too late. Police vehicles surrounded it from every direction. The driver attempted to escape on foot, but was quickly tackled by officers. The man with the silver ring was arrested only a few yards from the vehicle. Inside the SUV, officers found fake ID cards, burner phones, cash, and several small bottles containing the same chemical that had been found in the poisoned water. Within hours, detectives obtained search warrants. The investigation uncovered financial records linking the suspects to multiple fraudulent insurance schemes across several states. More importantly, they discovered messages exchanged between the man in the suit and my wife. The messages revealed that she had agreed to help transfer my fortune after my death in exchange for millions of dollars. But there was a final surprise. During questioning, my son completely confessed. With tears in his eyes, he admitted that he had accepted money because he believed they were planning to manipulate my company after retirement. He insisted he never knew they intended to murder me. The evidence supported his statement. He had made terrible decisions driven by greed, but he had not planned my death. As for my wife, she survived. Weeks later, she chose to cooperate with investigators after realizing the same criminals intended to eliminate her once they received the inheritance.
Her testimony helped prosecutors expose the entire organization. Months passed. The court sentenced the leaders of the conspiracy to lengthy prison terms. The insurance fraud network was dismantled. The attempted murder charges ensured they would never again have the opportunity to destroy another family. One quiet afternoon, I invited Maria to my home. We sat together in the same dining room where everything began. The table had been replaced. The glasses were different, but I could still remember every second of that terrible day. I handed Maria a small envelope. She looked confused. "What is this?" I saved my life. Inside was the deed to a beautiful house and enough money for her to retire comfortably. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. If you hadn't whispered those 5 words, I wouldn't be here today." Several weeks later, I met my son again. For the first time in years, we spoke honestly. Trust could not be rebuilt overnight. Some wounds never disappear completely, but forgiveness begins with truth, and truth finally had a place in our family. I also made one final decision. I rewrote my entire will, not because of fear, not because of anger, but out of wisdom. I donated a large portion of my wealth to charities supporting elderly victims of financial abuse and fraud, ensuring that others would receive the protection I almost lost. The remaining assets were placed into carefully monitored family trusts with strict legal safeguards, making it impossible for anyone to manipulate them again. As I signed the new documents, I looked at the clean glass of water beside my hand. For a brief moment, I smiled, not because I had become suspicious of everyone, but because I had learned the greatest lesson of my life. Trust is precious, but trust should never replace wisdom. Love without honesty becomes deception. Greed eventually destroys everyone who embraces it. And sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one that saves your life. That single whisper from Maria didn't just stop a murder. It gave me a second chance to live, to forgive, and to make sure my legacy would never again be built on blind trust, but on truth, integrity, and gratitude. And every morning after that, when the sun rose over my garden once again, I thanked God not for my wealth, but for the chance to open my eyes before it was too late.